My name is Drew Waldron, and I am on with Time Kid of the Year and America's top young scientist, Heman Bekele. Heman, thank you so much for joining me.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to interview you. You have such an interesting story. You are the youngest person that I've ever interviewed on this show. At the age of 14, you received a tremendous amount of attention for developing a low-cost soap that treats skin cancer. Now, when you're introducing yourself to all your audiences and all the people that you meet, how do you explain that portion of your life?
I guess it starts in the very beginning when I had this crazy idea to find a way to treat skin cancer, but at a really low cost. And so when I explain that stage of my life to people, I just say that it was really a period where I was filled with this very like youthful curiosity and innovative sense of the world. It really just took off, like you said, when I pitched the idea to a competition called the 3M Young Scientist Challenge. And so, well, from an outsider's perspective, it might be a little confusing how I was able to just get this random idea and have it blow up super fast. What was the case was like months of trial and error and preparation up to that big date. So yeah, when I try to explain that stage of my life, it really is just discussing how innovative and curious and just overall excited I was to see how far I could take this idea. And then from there, when it did take off, I mean, the rest is history. And so that's what it really was, just a mix of like passion, curiosity, and excitement that led to the creation of skin cancer treating soap.
And leading up to that, how do you go from being a young kid who's playing with a chemistry set for the first time to, advancing your knowledge to this point where you're able to realize like, oh, these chemicals in this composition will be a low-cost skin cancer treatment? How did your education develop through that time period?
For example, growing up in Ethiopia, I was always tinkering with like whatever I could get my hands on. So some of the examples of this, I was in love with household chemistry sets, just mixing together whatever I could get my hands on. So like laundry detergent, different types of soap, just to look at what type of reaction would come out of it. And I always say that isn't too far, as many would think, from what I do now, like cancer research. And obviously, there's completely two opposite parallels, but at the same time, there's a lot of those same like fundamental ideals with both that are really reflective even with what I do today. So I really did develop that like initial curiosity, love for learning, and just experimentation and like the scientific process through those like very early stage experiments when I was just going crazy in my kitchen. So of course, it took a lot of reading, a lot of learning to get to the stages where I was actually understanding like what those cancer fighting chemicals do, how to utilize those different agents to make something truly impactful. But at the same time, I am always really grateful for that like early stage development, just from like a curiosity and experimentation standpoint, because it really did develop my initial skills necessary to become a scientist and become a researcher. So it definitely was a mix of the two, both like initial curiosity, but then also like learning as I grew through reading, through research papers, through just always being curious and wanting to know more.
Very well said. As you were going through the 3M competition process, you are a very young person who is being exposed to these great, intelligent scientists with a lot of power, a lot of equipment, a lot of resources at their hands. Was that intimidating for you at that age?
For sure. I feel like there was a little, sense of naivety through it all because I was so young and just so curious and passionate, and I really just wanted to see this idea come to life. So before the intimidation, my first thought was just pure excitement. Being given so many resources to be able to utilize what at the time was just like a prototype and explore its potential in a real like scientific process, like with people that have experience bringing something like from concept all the way to reality was super exciting. But like you said, it was also very intimidating. I was paired up with a couple of mentors at 3M. And they were very nice. They really walked me through the process slowly, taught me what it really meant to go through R&D, and kind of helped make sure that my ideas were facilitated in a way that was smooth and structured, rather than at the time what I was used to, which was just really excited, really passionate, but didn't exactly know how to strategically go upon developing a product. So it was intimidating at first, but it was also an incredible experience. I learned so much from the mentorship, and it did take me all the way to where I am today. So I'm so grateful for that opportunity.
Yeah, it's a very deep pool to dive into, but that's so cool. As you've developed your career into the keynote speaking that you do with APB, what do you want your audiences to leave your keynotes feeling?
In one word, I would say hopeful is one thing. I feel like right now, well, the keynote speaking landscape, but really the scientific landscape, just the general community as a whole doesn't see much representation from a youth perspective. There aren't many people my age that are really showing the world that anything is possible, whether it's applied to my specific field of science and innovation, or really whatever you want to put your mind to. Not only if you are a member of any sort of youth community, empowering you to believe that anything you believe is possible, but also if you're an adult, showing that youth ideas should be heard and we really do deserve a seat at the table. A lot of times, youth are thought of as maybe like a novelty act or something that they're just there to be there. But I genuinely believe that we have the idea to facilitate real change when our ideas are heard and implemented. I think that the one thing that I really try to push with everything that I do, even further than just science and the impact behind my ideas, is the power that youth hold and the potential that we have to genuinely create change. And so that's what I really hope that everyone that listens to my speeches is able to get out of it, is just that youth have the ability to create change. You just have to give them a shot in the dark.
It sounds like you are very passionate about young people being heard and not being, discriminated against just because of their lack of experience. Have you personally ever experienced a situation where your opinion was discounted because of your age?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of moments throughout my journey, especially in the research field, where there is that stigma around being young. I started doing research at labs when I was about 12 years old, and getting those opportunities was incredibly difficult. And I think that a part of that is, well, of course, I mean, it's very expected to have some level of skepticism and not want a 12-year-old in your lab. But then there is also another aspect of it that's just the stigma behind youth in general, that they don't have the ability to contribute because the problem is too complex. And so when I was first looking for research opportunities to be able to pursue this wild invention of mine, I think that there was a lot of people that said no, not necessarily because of the potential of my idea itself, but the character behind it, the fact that I was so young. And I think that that's something even to this age that still exists, some level of stigma behind age in the research field, but really in the world as a whole, whether you're in advocacy or you're really just trying to drive change at a young age. A lot of people won't take your ideas as seriously because of your age. And so what I'm really just trying to show is that we really need to be listening to the content of the idea rather than the content of the person themselves, like how old they are. And that's really important. And so hopefully I'm able to share that message and show as an example that really anything is possible even from a young age.
Absolutely. Just pivoting to another question. I know that you moved to the US from Ethiopia when you were relatively young, but were there any forms of culture shock when you moved to the US? Like, what was the most difficult part of moving countries?
That's a really good question. I guess one thing is in Ethiopia, I had the ability to, I mean, just speak to everyone. I think that's where my initial passion for like public speaking, storytelling, and just sharing the impact and potential that we all have as human beings really came from. But then when I moved to America, of course that still existed, but it was definitely a lot more structured. I couldn't just talk to a stranger for hours on end. So that was one big culture shock, having, like specific times to like speak with teachers and ask questions. And of course that still exists in Ethiopia, but it's a lot more loose and open-ended. And you can just talk to whoever you see on the street. If you're interested in what they're doing, you can ask them about it and learn as much as you want. And there is a lot more structure in the United States, but I think that that kind of led to a transition from like loving speaking to others and having that love and passion for public speaking, which still exists, but then also developing like a more structured form of learning as well, with like reading and research papers and looking really deep into like different types of literature and open access resources. And so I think that having the ability to get a little bit of both worlds was super instrumental in that just early stage development for sure.
Very well said. And for someone who loves speaking so much, I think that keynote speeches are the exact right field for you to pivot to. Heyman, we always end this on a fun question, and I feel like I have to ask you this. Every time I see a news story of you or an article, it always starts out in the same way, where a reporter says something along the lines of, "Oh, most 14-year-old boys are on their phones or playing video games, but this kid is inventing cancer-treating soap." And I feel like that paints you in a little bit paints you as a kid who doesn't like to have fun, and I don't believe that's true. So the last thing I want to ask you is, what do you do when you are not researching, when you're not delving into scientific research? What do you do for fun, Heyman?
No, it's so funny that you say that because I've always not been the biggest fan when they start with that line, almost making me seem like I'm some like god amongst 14, 15-year-olds when in reality I'm doing all of the same things. I mean, I love playing video games. Unfortunately, I don't have as much time as I used to, so I do have to pivot and do like less time-consuming things for fun. But I play sports. I like to play basketball. I used to be a big fan of playing chess. I used to go to tournaments all the time and just get my rating up. I'm in the marching band. I play trombone. I play piano. So I do a lot of the typical teenage activities. Research is just one part of me that I'm really passionate about, and that ends up being what's the main part of my story. But at the same time, there's a lot on the back end which I really have fun doing as well. Thank you for asking that question.
No,
I
of
love
course.
sharing that.
Of course. After doing all this research on you, and once I ran into like the third iteration of that, I thought to myself, I have to give him a chance to defend himself. I have to give him a shot here.
For
That
sure.
is absolutely. That is going to conclude my interview with Heman Bekele. Heyman, thank you so much for taking the time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.